Hi guys, welcome to my video and welcome to another WWE reaction. This video was recommended by Jaleel or Jali. Sorry, I butcher names all the time. And he said, can you react to why WrestleMania 17 was almost the darkest day in wrestling history? This really captured, like, I read this, I was like, wait, what? Why? And I want to know. So let's go and check out the video. It's by WrestleLore, the original one, if you want to check it out. And if you want to check out my reactions, stick around.
WrestleMania 17 is regarded by many as the greatest WrestleMania of all time. While fans in attendance rejoiced in the absolute spectacle that was WrestleMania 17, they had no idea that they very nearly witnessed perhaps the most shocking tragedy in wrestling history.
Why?
Outside the arena waited a desperate individual looking to send a message with a loaded gun. As Paul Heyman called the action at ringside, he had no idea that his life was in danger. To best explain the situation, we need to go all the way back to the very beginnings of Paul Heyman's ECW.
Okay, my God, I didn't know that Paul Heyman had such drama.
WCW as Paul E. Dangerously, but was ultimately fired from the company after butting heads with WCW's booker, Bill Watts. Heyman would soon join Eastern Championship Wrestling, which he would quickly take over as his own and form Extreme Championship Wrestling. His firing from WCW left a chip on Heyman's shoulders. While yes, he presented ECW as anti-WCW and WWF, his real problem was with WCW. This mentality led to ECW becoming the underground rebel of the wrestling industry. Many people credit ECW as being the launching pad for the Attitude Era. Without this company, we may have never seen Stone Cold Steve Austin drinking a beer and flipping off the boss.
That's true.
ECW was edgy, violent, and dangerous. This aura around the company brought an extremely loyal and dedicated fan base. Heyman was able to create an us versus them mentality that the fans and the entire locker room would abide by, one of whom was Tommy Dreamer. By the mid-90s, Dreamer had cemented himself as a core pillar of the ECW brand, his character being described as similar to Die Hard's John McClane, an ordinary man pushed to extraordinary measures. Dreamer was making a name for himself as part of this rebel organization, and the industry began to take notice. In 1995, Dreamer recalls being offered a WCW contract for $75,000 to join the company. He would be brought in to form the tag team The American Males and would be making more money than he was making in ECW. However, Dreamer felt as though ECW had a purpose and was gaining momentum, which it was. Dreamer also felt like he'd be leaving for enemy territory and betraying Heyman's trust, so Dreamer ultimately declined the offer. Scotty Riggs would form the American Males tag team with Buff Bagwell instead, and Dreamer would go on to become a true ECW legend.
Ew.
He's often referred to as the heart and soul of ECW, and while he wasn't necessarily making huge money at this time, his name value was certainly growing, and by 1997, WCW came calling again. This time, WCW offered even more money than before, but were also interested in signing several other ECW stars. Dreamer recalls Raven, the Pitbulls, the Eliminators, RVD, Sabu, Fonzie, and Sandman all receiving calls from WCW. Dreamer assumed, probably correctly, that WCW weren't necessarily interested in him, but rather interested in hurting Heyman and ECW. Dreamer would decline this offer as well and stick with Heyman. During this time, Dreamer would take on more and more responsibility on behalf of the company. He would take on a more managerial role and would even begin booking the matches, all while performing in the ring just as much, if not more,
That's
than
really
anybody
nice.
else.
He really stuck
During
with
this
Paul
time,
there.
Dreamer was
And believed
seen
in
as
the
Paul
company.
Heyman's right-hand man.
Yeah.
Then, leading into the new millennium, Dreamer would receive yet another call from WCW.
They really
This
wanted
time,
him.
Things were a little more interesting. Eric Bischoff would reportedly offer Dreamer a contract of $750,000
From
in guaranteed pay.
75,000 to
This was
750.
obviously a significant bump in pay, and Tommy began to weigh these options. Bischoff wanted to run an ECW invasion angle on their show, but told Tommy that Heyman was not likely to go for it. Bischoff felt they could still do the angle with a guy like Dreamer. Feeling a loyalty to Heyman, Tommy would call Heyman to try to convince him to cooperate with WCW so that each party could benefit. According to Dreamer, Heyman immediately dismissed the idea and stated, "Vince would never forgive me." Tommy immediately picked up on this puzzling
and
statement,
his loyalty
but
to
didn't
Vince.
think too much into it at the time. Instead, he would focus on this offer from WCW and what it would mean to him and his family to make that kind of money. Dreamer was faced with a difficult decision to make. He had been a major factor in the success of ECW. In his words, he was all but running the company. He felt that if ECW took off in the way he believed it could, Dreamer would have the most to gain alongside Paul Heyman. Being such a cornerstone of the company both in and outside the ring, if ECW were to succeed, he would too. On the other hand, WCW's offer came with a lot less risk, and Dreamer could make a ton of money without the stress of running the entire company.
I would say go
After
for
much
it.
consideration, Dreamer ultimately decided he was headed for WCW.
Okay. Which I think a lot of us would
Out
have
of
done
loyalty
too.
to Paul Heyman, Tommy would inform him of his decision face to
I
face.
mean, if Paul was a true friend and cared about him, I think no matter how big of a loss for you and your own company that is, if you cannot offer him the same deal and you cannot keep him and you cannot give him a better life, at least be happy for him for seeking something better for himself and the family. You have to understand that.
According to Dreamer, Heyman would completely break down. Through the tears, Heyman would tell Tommy that ECW would not survive without him, and that all of his friends wouldn't have jobs if he left. This struck a nerve with Dreamer. Considering
That's so
himself to be a
mean.
company
Put so
guy
much
and
pressure on
loyal
him.
friend, these words would ultimately lead him to decline WCW once and for all.
No!
Somewhat ironically, it would be the WWF who would deliver the final blows to ECW. Despite apparently being on good terms with one another, the WWF would swoop in and sign Taz and the Dudley Boys to the WWF. According to Jim Ross, many people from ECW were actually calling to try to negotiate a deal. Mike Awesome would also leave for WCW as the ECW champion in a bizarre turn of events, and finally, ECW would lose their TV deal with TNN as the WWF landed a deal with the network. ECW struggled financially without a network deal and would ultimately close its doors. Interestingly, it seems as though Heyman and Vince McMahon had been talking for quite some time. According to JR, Vince had been funding ECW with an approximate $50,000 a month to keep the company afloat. Heyman would approach the USA Network to try and secure another TV deal, in which Vince McMahon personally wrote a letter encouraging the network to add ECW to their programming. These efforts would be in vain, however, as ECW would be unable to secure the deal and the company would soon file for bankruptcy. But it's still interesting to note that McMahon and Heyman were frequently working together during this time. According to JR on the Grilling with JR podcast, the WWF simply wanted to keep the company going, knowing that they would be first in line to buy their assets when the time came. though Vince McMahon has stated that this was in part due to the WWF signing talent from ECW, feeling it was only fair to give something back since they were using ECW as a developmental territory. In this instance, it was better for them to work together and establish a good relationship while facing their more threatening rival, WCW. Heyman reportedly did not disclose the working relationship with Vince nor the company's financial struggles to anybody in the locker room. When Dreamer eventually found out about the financial uncertainty, he decided to put some of his own money into the company.
What did we learn today from this guy? What did we learn? I hope you learned something. I did.
Seeing himself as Heyman's partner, he claims to have put both his and his parents' money into the company so that they could continue the fight against WCW and the WWF, not knowing that Vince McMahon and Heyman were already working together. Despite these efforts,
Heyman! Shame on you! I guess if you want to succeed in life, you gotta play the game. You gotta play the game. That's it. That's it. And if you don't want to succeed in life, you gotta be like this guy. Yeah.
W would declare bankruptcy at the end of the year 2000, and the fight for ECW was over. In the span of about a year, Dreamer had gone from declining $750,000 from WCW to now watching both companies close their doors. After the final ECW show on January 13th, 2001, the company was forced into bankruptcy proceedings. During this time, Paul Heyman would be brought on as a color commentator in the WWF, filling in for Jerry Lawler, who had left the company in protest for the firing of his then-wife, Stacey Carter. Heyman would reportedly promise to bring Dreamer in with him on multiple occasions, but after all of these plans fell through, Dreamer began to get desperate. In the weeks leading up to WrestleMania 17, Heyman would again call Dreamer to tell him he would have a spot on the show in the now legendary TLC match. However, these plans would again fall through for unknown reasons, and Dreamer's spot would be taken by Rhino. Then later, Heyman would tell Dreamer once again that he would debut in a hardcore match at WrestleMania, with, quote, the focus being entirely on you. But these plans too would be cancelled. Dreamer was now feeling a lot of resentment towards Heyman. The man who Dreamer had considered a close friend and business partner had lied to him about ECW's financial position, had accepted his and his family's money without telling him that McMahon was already pouring money into it, had begged Dreamer not to take the biggest contract of his life, and was seemingly now lying to Dreamer once again with the promise of a WWF run that simply wasn't coming to fruition. Feeling betrayed, Tommy would fall into a deep depression. According to Dreamer himself, his thoughts would get darker by the day, and soon convinced himself that Paul Heyman had to pay. Tommy was working on the Indies during this time and found himself in Texas just a few days out from WrestleMania 17, which was also set to take place in Texas. While at the Indie show, Tommy would see a sign permitting firearms into the building, with a staff member explaining that in Texas, you can carry a weapon on you when entering a venue. This would spark a sinister plan in Tommy's head. According to Dreamer himself, he had decided he was going to get revenge on Heyman in the most brutal and public way possible at the Showcase of Immortals. While the event was taking place, his plan was to simply walk into the Houston Astrodome with a loaded gun, and at some point during the broadcast, he would appear behind the announcer's desk live on TV, jump the barricade, and shoot Heyman in front of a live audience. He would then hit his signature pose before turning the gun on himself and ending it all.
Huh? Wait, what? Again,
jump the
what?
barricade.
What?
His plan was to simply walk into the Houston
His plan
Astrodome
was
with a
okay.
loaded gun. And at some
I did not
point
hear
during
his
the
plan. I
broadcast,
thought it
he
happened.
would appear behind the announcer's desk live on TV, jump the barricade, and shoot Heyman in front of a live audience. He would then hit his signature pose before turning the gun on himself and ending it all.
He was so desperate that he was ready to even unalive himself. Like, Paul Heyman, what have you done?
This may seem like some twisted daydream with zero intention behind it. However, according to Dreamer, he was absolutely set on this plan. In his mind, Heyman had ruined his and his family's lives and thought he would be, quote, the ultimate martyr for these actions. He apparently got so far into this plan as to actually show up outside the Astrodome with a loaded gun. While the event was taking place, Dreamer was apparently across the street sitting in his car with a loaded weapon. There's some speculation from a few different sources that he had secured a front row ticket from a scalper and was ready to execute his plan. Fortunately, earlier that day, Dreamer had received a phone call. It was an unrecognized number, so he hadn't answered the phone, but the caller did leave a voicemail. At some point during the evening, Dreamer decided to check this voicemail. The message was from none other than good old JR. Hey Tommy, it's Jim Ross. Just wanted to let you know we are still thinking about you. We are gonna get it done. Just gotta hang tight. Thank you.
That's easier said than done. Oh, hang tight with no money. Like literally having your whole family and your parents as well disappointed because you used their all money and like you're going into bankruptcy and you have nothing to live for anymore, and you went from like this opportunity that you were about to get to like nothing at all, being betrayed by your best friends, and hang tight. We'll get back to you. Just keep hanging tight. Yeah. Until when? How long do you think a person can take it?
Single phone call gave Dreamer a glimmer of hope. Until now, Dreamer had only heard from Heyman about any WWF plans. But now JR himself, who was head of talent relations, was telling him that they had plans for him and that they were in fact thinking of him. While it may never be a $750,000 contract, it was still an opportunity. This phone call let Dreamer know that he wasn't forgotten by the world of wrestling and there was still hope for his career. Dreamer would thankfully drive away, and what would have probably been the darkest broadcast in television history never came to be. WrestleMania 17 would go on to become a legendary event, and Dreamer would eventually be brought into the WWF on July 9th, 2001 as part of the Invasion storyline. Ironically, once again, standing side by side with Paul Heyman.
So how much did they pay him? Is he satisfied now? What does he have to say about it now? Jim Ross being professional and polite prevented a tragedy. Let that be a lesson. Communication is everything. I feel like they knew. Paul Heyman knew something bad is gonna happen, and Jim Ross took the opportunity to try to prevent whatever bad is gonna happen. Because people talk, and I feel like Dreamer maybe mentioned it somewhere that he's gonna harm Paul or harm himself, and they had a feeling, especially knowing that Dreamer was in Texas as well. The moral of the story: loyalty to your job won't get you anywhere. Exactly. This is 100% true. I also learned from my brother's mistake that he did when he was younger. He was finishing his university. He had saved some money and opened a new business with his best friend, male friend. And what ended up with, like 1 year after, he had to sell his share to his best friend because his best friend betrayed him in the business, and he almost went bankrupt and he lost all his money because of his best friend. And he said never do business with family and friends, and also like the loyalty to your job can get you to nowhere. Like he put all of his heart, all of his money, everything into one place, believing in it, and then got betrayed. And yeah, so I learned from my brother's mistake not to do something like that. I could think he was really young, and it was just one hurdle, one thing that made him learn from that experience, and now he's doing well. But still, you know, like it is really, 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 really important to separate those two. Follow the money, follow the opportunities. Don't think about the people you leave behind. If they care about you, they will be happy that you are doing good for yourself and your own family, which should be your number one priority. If you're a dad, if you're a husband, like if you have a household, that should be your number one priority, you know. But that is it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more, and let me know in the comments down below what else would you like me to react to. Just write react and then the title of the video, or also from whom it is made, or the content creator. But that is it. Have a wonderful day and see you in the next video. Bye.